have some responsibility to take, and they're not taking it. But here this evening, we've heard Liberals speak, including the Prime Minister and the Minister of Public Safety, and they took advantage of their time to criticize the abusive actions that we've seen, as we've all done, and we've all denounced these actions. But what we would have liked to have heard from the government tonight was, what's the plan? The government's going to send more money to the RCMP. Great. What else? We haven't heard anything else. What is the mandate of those officers? The RCMP is to continue to ensure the safety of people. Is it to increase surveillance, or is it to end what's happening in the city of Ottawa, to end this siege? So this is a responsibility for the federal government and for the Prime Minister to send a clear message to the people of Ottawa and the protesters, and to show that they're in control and that they won't let things degenerate. We've seen abusive actions. We don't want to see any more, but we don't know what's going to happen next. So it's unfortunate with what we've seen tonight, and I'm sure that, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to receive a whole pile of hateful messages this evening based on what I've said, because I've see our society divided this way, but I'm doing my job. The federal government did its
question.
comments.
Member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for her intervention today and her comments. The first request that's being made, the primary request that's being made by the leaders of this convoy, is that the Governor General dissolve this Parliament and appoint the Governor General to form a quote Citizens of Canada Committee. Does this, to this member, seem like a group that can enter into negotiations with effectively?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question, and I will correct him. The first demand, the initial demand made by these protesters was based on the rules put in place by the federal government to ensure that truckers are vaccinated when they cross the Canada-US border. And so that was the initial demand. Nice job. I didn't see the federal government to send a message to the protesters, and yes, things have degenerated since then, and as I've said, there are some ridiculous demands, but some are more legitimate. We know that people are fed up, and that's what people are trying to tell us, but to not say anything to them, I don't think that's going to improve the situation, and I don't think that by saying complaining and go get vaccinated is going to make the truckers get into their cabs tomorrow and drive off.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Oshawa.
I thank my colleague for her excellent speech and her sincere desire to find a solution and work together. And I was upset with the Liberals' lines of questioning to be adversarial. Mr. Instead of doing that, as the member said, to end the vaccine mandates, he was name-calling, he was demonizing, dehumanizing these Canadians, and he has infringed on their charter rights and freedoms. And in order to do that, he needs to show that it's demonstrably justified. And Mr. Speaker, we're seeing today the CDC recognizes natural immunity. The WHO scientists are saying, recommending dropping these mobility restrictions. John Hopkins says that lockdowns don't work.
The enemy team has lost their lead. Keep going.
And the Lancet says that both Canadians people transmit the virus equally since the Delta variant. So the science says that we could come out with a plan to stop the restrictions, get back to normal, which he support. The opposition leaders and the government getting together to let these demonstrators know there is a plan, there is a solution, there is an end. Let's end this together.
I'd like to thank my colleague for his question, But that's what the Bloc Québécois has been calling for since the beginning, that we create a crisis group for those who are directly involved in the ground. And we're open to the government discussing with the opposition parties because we have ideas and we're all tired of measures. But the ones that my colleagues right now, most of those were put in place by the provinces, by Quebec in particular. So it's not the federal government who can get rid of certain confinement measures because the federal government didn't put those in place. So there are certainly discussions that can be had, and I would agree with him. This is their plan. I understand why it's different for the government to not do that. We know that we can't predict the future. We know there could be a new variant, but there should be some kind of plan. And the Quebec government is doing that. They're going step by step with the deconfinement plan. So maybe we need to see a similar plan from the federal government, at least for the measures that are under their jurisdiction. That would be good for us. Mr. Speaker, we're going back and forth because on the one hand we have a government that has decided that it's not going to take and now it's too late. And on the other side we have the official opposition, the Conservatives, who
10 frags left for the enemy team.
their historic passion for law and order because 53-foot truck in the middle of the street is illegal. Would it be possible? And I'd like to ask my honourable colleague what she thinks.
Your team is in the lead. Keep it up.
The honourable member for Avignon-Lavitier ce matin m'a fait Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was an excellent question.
The enemy team only needs 3 more frags to win.
A lot of people and organizations who are trying to profit from this and who are trying to make political gain, who are trying to maybe get a certain base that they lost because people are fed up. But you know what? Everyone's fed up. Everyone's tired of this. But there's a certain part of the population that wants to, get that message out more than others. And I see that I'm out of time, but I hope that everyone, all elected officials, can work together in a good way so that we can get out of this crisis. Thank you. Resuming debate, the honourable member for Saint-Jean. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to start by saying that I'm very happy to speak to this situation in front of us tonight. Unfortunately, I'd hoped we wouldn't get to this point, but it's back on the description of what happened with, all of the unfortunate things that we've seen which took place. My colleague outlined that very well. So I'd like to go speak to some other points, maybe a little bit more, not necessarily emotional, but maybe talk to some of the missed opportunities that we've seen because this situation has got worse and worse. So all those things that we missed.
We are in a house where there are parties who sometimes by definition in agreement with the ruling party, part of political jousting. In the fact, however, we are close to a similar position that we seem to have lost. And that's unfortunately what is going on right now. We
Your team gets the first kill.
As much as the fact that the situation is taking control, we have allowed ourselves to be polarized rather than having an intelligent discussion together on how to move forward and get out of this. We are so polarized that we seem to forget how we are collectively sick of COVID. We seem to have ignored this fact. We had against those who have criticized the national Some people have accused them against protesters. Therefore, you are for closing restaurants. You are for the fact that people are losing jobs. But everyone's happy that people are losing jobs. But that's what people seem to be communicating now. Some people have even said you were against freedom of expression. And me, myself, in a number of protests in the past. What I can say is that it's not the case for me. The issue is that the Prime Minister has missed the opportunity to this situation. He is leader, and therefore he has to be a source of escalation. The fact that he calls some people racists, extremists, moderate in their claims, and put them in the same basket. And so, moderate, the more thoughtful protesters perhaps didn't themselves to denounce a certain form of polarization was fostered. Some people close themselves to discussing. People did want to talk. First of all, our friends, our neighbours, our families. When I say we, I mean MPs, those who have talked to us. Unless you live under a rock, you know that something is happening out there. And our friends, our close ones, said, hey, I brought my daughter. People are finally mobilizing because we are truly sick of it. To talk to them. We agree on a number of issues. There are many people who are ready to protest in a perfectly benevolent way, a peaceful way, but the situation has allowed to in article. The collective protesting and how sick people are scooped up by ill-intentioned individuals.
Your team leads at halfway.
Diverted. But when you speak to friends and family, when you spoke to them at the very beginning of the protest, you realized that people were doxing others. They were giving out MPs' addresses and numbers, saying, go harass them. But a lot of people were saying, no, I want to protest, I'm sick of COVID, but I don't want that to happen. And so when you were talking to these people, you realized that we were much closer to what they wanted and what they were thinking rather than anything else. There are also protesters with whom discussion was possible. I did it myself. On day 3, I believe, of the protest, I was waiting for my car. I was waiting for another car. I was waiting behind a car with a Quebec flag, and I said, hang on, we're not the day before. Are you going to take your time because I have things to do? And they said, no. Are you here to protest? I said, no, I'm a parliamentarian. And so we started. And it was in a perfectly good atmosphere. These people were open. We talked about a number of issues. For example, I asked them, why are you here? I told them truckers required to be vaccinated to go to both sides of the border. And the protesters said, oh, I didn't know that. What do you... And then I said, what do you think about the fact that the protest is making restaurants more money? By protesting, but you're harming them. And they said, I haven't thought about this. And we talked about this for more than the time it took for them to load their car. And then we said, channels of conversation and dialogue were cut. It's a missed opportunity to tell parliamentarians, the protesters, people who as you do, third group of people.
Bad guys have the lead. Time to play catch up.
Whose channel of communication, the situation has been
Your team is in the lead. Keep it up.
so bad. It was impossible. We were were so polarized that we felt
The enemies have
obliged to
taken the
say
lead.
either we are for or we are against, which wasn't the case in Quebec City. Everyone found it perfectly accessible. No one said, no one felt obliged to say, I'm for, obliged to say, I'm against, because it was done in a disciplined way. On one end, people were saying, oh, you're racist and you're violent. And on the other side, it's protest and freedom of expression. We were so concentrated on what's happening here in the House of Commons that we seem to have lost sight of the fact that had we decided to be more open with vaccination, we wouldn't have had mutations. Perhaps
Your team has 10 frags left.
talk about people on the front line because that's also a huge issue. We have to reduce as much as possible the burden on first responders, and that is what is essential here. We seem to have lost sight of the fact that none of this would have happened if the federal government hadn't divested from healthcare in the past years, because confinement is the direct consequence of underfunding.
The enemy team is victory goal.
Unfortunately, we are here this evening because we've missed amazing opportunities to have an intelligent dialogue, an intelligent conversation on the ways to get out of this
Only
crisis.
3 more
And I hope
points
that
to
this evening's
victory.
debate will be an olive branch
At 1 point left.
so that we remember the reason for which we are here in the first place. And the reason is to finally find an end to this pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question et commentaires, questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to thank the member from St. Jean for her intervention today. I think that I certainly learned a lot from what she had to say. I really appreciated the personal account of the story that she shared about interacting with some of the protesters. And I think
I'm just trying to find where I was.
Quite frankly, and I think I can learn something from it, which is the fact that there are many different people out there with many different objectives and motivations. And indeed,
Thanks a lot.
she's absolutely right.
Fascist
There are
truckers.
people that have come to this protest quite innocently. I've seen myself families out there walking the streets, and it's important to recognize that. I guess the problem for me is when I went to a drugstore like I did, and I saw somebody confront the store clerk and put a camera in their face and said, "You can't force me to wear a mask in here. I have rights." Blah 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 blah. Like, where do we draw the line? Like, how do we figure out how to appease the people who are legitimately not trying to create problem versus those that are overtly trying to do it? I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts on that.
Honourable député de Saint-Jean.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. I would like to thank the member from Kingston and the Islands for his question.
Oh,
It is described
enemy get your
a
first kill.
situation where people have done great things. Communities and people were denouncing on social media. The problem is, these coalesced into a sort of legitimacy, and then people on the margin add themselves to this, and it turns into something different. Had people rapidly taken control of perhaps there would still be isolated acts that would be easier to denounce. Something that's
Reminder to keep your questions and your answers until we get everybody that wants to have an opportunity. Question et commentaires.
Honourable Member for la Petite Patrie.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her presentation. It was a very interesting one with interesting angles. I would like to come back to what her colleague said, the colleague for Avignon Lamitisme et Matapédia. She said that the Liberals are hiding behind games of jurisdiction to explain their lack of responsibility, their lack of leadership, and lack of accountability. They're saying that it should be, they said that it should be the Article 3 service that should act. It is not federal jurisdiction. If the honourable member agrees that in a crisis,
Enemy team has lost their lead. Keep going.
the honourable member for Saint-Jean, they don't become
Enemy team.
to threaten to other jurisdictions. I'm sure that's what my colleague for Rosemont Petit Patrie was probably hoping that I would say, but collaboration is still great, and that's what we've hoped from the very beginning.
A Commodore, questions and comments?
Anybody else wants to ask a question? I'm going to wait 1 second here just to be sure.
The Honourable Member for L'Avignon Métis Matapédia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for excellent speech. The speech gave a good overview of both sides of the situation. It's unfortunate. Well, it's great because people are watching CPAC this evening. Since my speech, my Twitter has been blowing up with haters. So I'd like to hear what my colleague has to say. People are using this situation to divide themselves and to insult people. It's deplorable. Getting messages. I'd like to hear what my colleague has to say. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean, 32 seconds. It's rather short. Well, I find it deplorable, and I see that my phone is which is unfortunate because probably we wouldn't be here had the situation been taken care of and managed from the very beginning. The MNAs in Quebec City probably didn't receive the same number of hateful messages after their protest at the end of the weekend because there was no such polarization that happened. It was done in a much more cordial way. As I mentioned, we no doubt much closer to being closer to the people that are protesting. We've allowed ourselves to be far too polarized. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Privy Council and Minister for Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to speak on this very important issue that is taking place. As members know that I represent the riding of Ottawa Centre. The House of Commons, where most of you are sitting, I'm sitting at my home, is located in Ottawa Centre. Speaker, what we see outside, we're talking about for last 11 days happening, is happening right in the heart of my community. Although the Parliament Hill is located right here in downtown Ottawa, many people forget, and perhaps these occupiers have forgotten, that a block in all directions from Parliament Hill to the residences, there are people who call downtown their home, their seniors, their people with disabilities, their young people, their families who live in downtown Ottawa. Speaker, I really have now lost words as to how I can describe what my community is going through. So I thought perhaps I can start my remarks today by just reading to all the members, through you, Speaker, few of the emails that I have been receiving. Just give you a glimpse of the pain and agony people have going through for the last 11 days. Speaker, I can spend the full 20 minutes reading you emails because there are so many. but I do
And
want
this
to
is
talk a
important
little bit
because these
about
people say
solutions
very violent and
in my remarks.
very counterintuitive as far
So here's
as
email number
any
one.
sort of scientific understanding or any sort
I'm one of the Ottawa
logic is
residents in your
concerned.
riding. I
They're just
feel the need to
straight,
raise my concerns with
non-stop
you
bully
so
talk.
you may escalate them through the appropriate
And
channels.
looks like the enemies are
The
the first to
members
reach
of the
halfway.
convoy who are occupying the city have been causing
violent
mayhem across downtown. And I strongly disagree with the police action, or rather the inaction of the police up to this point. These people from the convoy have stolen from homeless shelters, vandalized and damaged businesses that display pride flags, assaulted and harassed residents for wearing masks during the pandemic, desecrated our memorials, launched illegal fireworks, and most recently have been caught attempting to set an apartment building on fire while taping the doors closed. This is just some of the inexcusable actions that these people have done to our city and to the residents.
The enemy team has lost their lead. Keep going.
Email number 2. I have been a resident of Ottawa for over 40 years. Never before have I seen such prolonged, aggressive, and unlawful behavior in our community. Horns blaring, diesel fumes, engines revving,
Your
and
enemies
shouting
are winning.
at all hours have become insufferable. I am horrified by the racist and anti-Semitic symbols I have recently seen in my neighborhood.
Your team is in the lead. Keep it up.
And have no place in Canada.
Your enemies are winning.
It should be well understood 2 years into this pandemic that disabled folks are among the most vulnerable to COVID-19. We fall into two groups. There are those like me who are vaccinated but who face a higher risk of adverse outcomes should we get infected. Others are immunocompromised and get less protection from the vaccine and will be less able to fight off an infection. Others still are medically ineligible for a vaccine. Public health measures requiring mask wearing and vaccine passport have kept the disabled community safe. They are our first line of defense. Disabled Ottawans have been placed at serious risks over the past 10 days given the flagrant disregard for mask wearing and vaccine passports by occupiers. Places like the Rideau Center and the small businesses have closed because they were unable to keep customers and their employees safe. Email number 4. We're constituents of Ottawa Centre. Our daughter, however, is in Centretown. She was first impacted by the current crisis when a week ago, last Friday, she was trying to do an online presentation with 9 days ago. Others have not been so lucky and have had to remain confined to their homes in the red zone. One of our daughter's visits to check on her home, all she could smell on her first 2 floors was diesel fuel. Imagine trying to take care of kids in this situation. One of our daughter's neighbors has downloaded an app that measures decibels. 66 is the maximum before hearing begins to be impaired. The neighbor's app was reading 72 inside her home. Email number 5. I feel unsafe buying groceries as people are in the store now wearing masks and behaving aggressively. Like many other businesses, Massine's independent grocer on Bank Street is dealing with the protest noise and aggression from the public, as well as possible increased exposure to COVID-19 Omicron from those not wearing masks. While taking on the cost of hiring extra security, I feel bad for the cashiers and security staff who have remained patient and calm under these dire conditions. I'm exhausted. While the last 23 months of the pandemic have certainly been challenging, working from home during the week with all the noise from the protests has become aggravating. While not being able to enjoy a short walk or a quiet afternoon
They threaten to
indoors
rape
over the
and
last
hurt
2
people
weekends,
that are wearing
it's
masks.
become
They say,
depressing.
well, your blood is now tainted, you
Mr.
have
Speaker,
experimental microchips
I
or
can
experimental
go
DNA in you,
I can rate
and
you 5,
you're a burden to our
10,
healthcare
15,
system, and a
20,
whole bunch of backward
100
shit.
more emails.
It's just
People
unreal.
pleading.
Somebody does have to do something about
People
this. It's went
who
on
are
for far too
peace-loving.
long.
People who understand that we live in the nation's capital and peaceful protest is part of our democracy. Something that is nothing short of an occupation, something that is unlawful and definitely not peaceful. What people have been asking in my community is that have we forgotten that we are still living through a global pandemic? In fact, we are still going through a fifth wave with restrictions around us to ensure that we do not get ill and that we do not overburden our healthcare system and our healthcare workers. Sometimes I wonder when I hear some of the arguments, especially that something like COVID-19 pandemic never happened. That somehow things were normal and the rules. Because we all have gone through a very difficult time. It has not been easy for any one of us. Conversation around what lies ahead. How do we end this pandemic? How do we get to a place that it becomes an endemic? And how our lives will be impacted by that? But that debate does not take place in the form that is happening right now outside the House of Commons. That's not a debate. That's just holding a community hostage. It's not engage in a meaningful conversation and a respectful conversation. Speaker, I am not interested in speaking to someone who waves a swastika or a Confederate flag. I have members of racialized and Jewish community in my writing who are, and I've used this word before, rattled. They're scared. They're re-traumatized and victimized. None of us believe that we are actually seeing those images in our hometown, our nation. Speaker, I urge all the members of this House who are all respectable, good people with the right motivation to serve your community, to build a better country, to please come together, to please ask these occupiers to leave my community alone. If they want to engage in a conversation, have a conversation, but we cannot have a conversation. Neighborhoods are being held hostage over the last 7 years. This protest, this occupation, this civil unrest has to come to an end for the sake of people who live in this community, for businesses who have suffered so much, who are looking to opening on January 31st when the ritual lockdown measures. They are unable to do any business.
Nice shot.
Closed. Have we thought about impact on them and their families? How they're going to make ends meet? I'm grateful to my colleagues. The member from the president of the Treasury Board, we're working closely so that we can find ways to support our businesses where they are
Nice. The enemy base has reached
of this occupation. So, Speaker, in my limited time, I want to focus on what can we do? How can we get out of this? All of us to let's work together. Speak with one voice. That we are to ask these occupiers to please leave, and then engage in a process where they work with their elected representatives, where they, hey, perhaps
We will dance on your grave.
So strong that we need better laws and better policies. But in a democratic society, that's what we do. We need to make sure that this occupation ends, and one of the ways we can do this is by ensuring the laws are being enforced. The Ottawa Police has been working hard, and they are responsible for providing the safety and security of the residents of Ottawa. That is their job. By law, that's what they're required to do. And it's important for them federal laws. All three of them have been broken. I am a lawyer by profession, speaker. I've been the former Attorney General of Ontario. I can give you an entire list of laws that have not been followed through, and we need to make sure that enforcement is there. If resources are needed, as they have been requested, as the federal government has been providing those resources to them, we will continue to do so. I've been involved in this from the moment this protest has started, and I have to tell you, working with the Minister of Public Safety, working with the Minister of Emergency, including the Prime Minister, who have taken the time to speak with me about this issue. We've been there for City of Ottawa and the Ottawa Police Service.
The enemies have got 10 to win.
The laws could be enforced. We saw some enhanced law enforcement starting last night. I really hope that enforcement is necessary.
The enemy team only needs 3 more.
We could.
1 more point and the enemies
that the
will win.
members of my community
Terrorists win.
they live. But we need to enforce the law. That is what the members of our community are asking for. We need to make sure that there's a plan and this occupation is put to an end. Speaker, there's no doubt that there's going to be a fair bit of conversations that are going to take place after this occupation is done, and it will come to an end. We will do as we always do, rightly so, learn from incidences like these, from mistakes made, things done well, things done not so well. And we shall do so in this circumstance as well. As you can imagine, as a member for Ottawa Centre, I am already starting to think, how can we do this differently? And in appropriate time, I will be presenting ideas, Speaker, that we need to consider so that we can protect our democratic institutions, that we can find ways to promote peaceful protests, democratic rights, but also be able to safeguard the right to live peacefully for the residents of downtown, the constituents that I'm so honored to serve. And one of those ideas, Speaker, that I will be speaking to the members, to the House, is perhaps an evaluation of parliamentary precinct. Right now we define parliamentary precinct
enemy, get your first kill.
And some of the buildings that are located on Wellington Street and Spark Street. Maybe we need to increasing the boundary of parliamentary precinct so that we can have a better, robust
Your team is leading.
safety protocols in place. Not take away lawful, peaceful protests, which are critical.
Bad guys have the lead. Time to play
But
catch up.
ensuring in a way that we do not run into the kind of circumstances we are running in. So I will be indulging members, my colleagues, into a conversation where we analyze and study better whether parliamentary precinct needs to have a bigger footprint and better protocols in place as to how we ensure that a whole downtown is not held hostage. Speaker, I hope you've been able to see the challenge that I am going through. But most importantly, Speaker, I hope that I have been able to channel some of the emotions of my
They've taken the lead.
constituents. Sometimes it's hard to express in words what my community is going through. Sometimes it's really difficult to hear the other side, and Speaker, I've always said
The enemies have taken the lead.
legitimize this occupation as something as civil or peaceful. When people are suffering, they've had a rough time almost over the last 2 years because of the pandemic, and this has made their life unbearable. Speaker, I urge you, I urge through you all the members of this House, let's stand together by the end of this debate and collectively ask for these people to leave.
Your enemies are winning.
In a civil conversation, we can hear each other and agree to disagree, but this is not the way to do it. I urge you, please leave our community alone. Please let people in Ottawa Centre, in downtown, peacefully. Thank you very much, Speaker.
Questions and comments? Question. Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the residents of Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou on this important topic. Mr. Speaker, the honorable parliamentary secretary made 2 points that I wish to follow up on. They're both relatively brief. The first is, Mr. Speaker, he said, let's work together. And I note that the official to the Prime Minister and to all party leaders to work together. So based on that, would the honorable parliamentary secretary be prepared to advise the Prime Minister to do just what he said he should be doing? Secondly, the honorable parliamentary secretary said the police should be enforcing the laws. Does he view it as the Prime Minister's job to help the situation?
Good shot.
The honorable.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I will address the second question first. I think the member opposite knows quite well that in our system of democracy, politicians do not tell as to how
Halfway point reached.
to enforce the law. There is a very important, significant, and healthy distinction and differentiation between the two. I have the honor of serving as the Solicitor General of Ontario. I very much know, Speaker, that you cannot tell police. So I will be very careful suggesting that somehow the Prime Minister should tell Ottawa Police Service, or any other police service for that matter, as to how they should apply the law. As for working together, of course we should. I look forward to looking at the letter. But I think the member opposite should also listen to the healthcare experts, to the medical experts. It is important that we get vaccinated and put an end to this. Thank you.
Monsieur le commentaire.
The honourable member for Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my school he talked about his my colleague was a member of the governing party. I counted the number of concrete solutions that have been proposed by the colleague, and I came up with 0. So where's the suggested where is that with the policeman? Where is the daily press conference? Press conference is nowhere. The Liberals have to understand that after the last election, Canadians and start listening to solutions.
The honorable parliamentary secretary.
Well, thank you very much, Speaker, and I think the member opposite is trying to say that somehow this is a political problem. Speaker, we're living in a pandemic. We have a healthcare challenge. This is a global pandemic. Wait, dude. this is happening across the world. So to suggest that the way to deal with the protests outside is by holding daily press conferences, I don't understand how that was going to put an end to this crisis. What's needed is to ensure that the laws that we have created, when you and I are part of creating those laws, are properly enforced. And if somebody breaks the law, then they should face the consequences of breaking the law. It's required in Ottawa at this moment. I'm on the ground, out in there trying to find solutions. We need to make sure the laws, this is an unlawful protest which needs to end. Thank you.
And commentaire, the honourable member for Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for his speech. When I talk to constituents, they are tired and frustrated and disheartened that we are still in this pandemic, but the vast majority of them are following tired and fed up with people who refuse to wear masks, who refuse to follow public health orders, and put others at risk. People in Ottawa, as the member mentioned, are beyond tired and fed up, experiencing harassment and assault,
Only 3 more points to victory.
and fascist symbols, women being threatened with rape, residents from racialized and 2S LGBTQI.
Just frags left for the enemy team.
Having discriminatory slurs hurled at them. Canadians were also concerned hearing reports of an attempted arson in the lobby of a residential apartment building. It's terrifying. Does the member agree that it should not have taken this long for the Prime Minister to start talking to municipal and provincial governments? The convoy organizers were clear about their intent. They were allowed to do exactly what they said they would do. Does the member understand why Ottawa residents are tired and fed up with this Liberal government?
Well, the member for Ottawa Centre.
Thank you. I thank the member for her comment, and I will agree with her on the point is that Canadians have made a lot of sacrifices, and they are following the public health guidelines. They are getting vaccinated. They are wearing masks. They are socially distancing themselves. It's amazing. I have 2 children. It's amazing to see the kind of habits our kids have developed. They're good habits. Good hygiene as a result. But a lot has been done. But I also want to assure the member that since the beginning of this crisis, the Prime Minister has been fully engaged. I've had conversations with him. He's being briefed. But as the head of government that has no power to tell police situation, our law is absolutely clear. Nor we want in our system of democracy having politicians tell police what laws they should be enforcing and how. It's our job to create the law, and an independent police role is to enforce the law, and in fact, independent judiciary to arbitrate
First kill goes to the enemy team.
Correct or not. But I can assure all the members that the Prime Minister has been engaged. The Prime Minister is fully informed and briefed.
The enemy team has lost their lead. Keep going.
This crisis.
Question et commentaire, questions and comments. The honourable member for Halifax.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to tell the that my heart is breaking for him and for his constituents. It's hard to imagine.
The enemy has taken the lead.
Halifax, a city that I love, and this city, and seeing the kind of damage,
They've taken the lead.
terrorizing of neighborhoods, damage to property, illegality going on. I can't. It must be so incredibly heartbreaking, and so many.
You're in the lead.
Go out. Now, the member's in a very unique position, being the member of parliament for the most directly impacted part of the city, but also as a former Attorney General for the province of Ontario. He alluded, Mr. Speaker, to some of the changes that he'll be bringing, proposals for changes that he'll be bringing forth in due course. I'd love if you could give us a sneak preview on the flavor of some of those. I mentioned changes to the parliamentary
precinct, elimination of vehicles off of Wellington Street and the pedestrianization of that street would be a remarkable innovation, but even changes to the operating procedures of this House to better manage some of the
The enemies have gotten ahead. Rein them in.
to hear that. Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Speaker. I thank the member opposite. You're absolutely right. I'm with the member from Ottawa Venue in the heart of this crisis. And as I mentioned, the community suffering is.
The enemy team has lost their lead. Keep going.
I'm starting to run out of words to explain it, and that's why I think as soon as this crisis is over, we need to start engaging in thinking about the future and how to prevent things like that by ensuring that we create an environment. We have peaceful protests, which is, again, I want to stress, is a democratic right. And so one of the things that everybody can imagine about Ottawa is multiple jurisdictions. We've got the Parliament of Canada, which is the government of Canada, and then you have the municipal service too. Street to street, jurisdictions. A park is owned by one entity and a street next to it, or municipal street. And so what we need to look at is the boundaries of parliamentary precincts so we can perhaps better coordinate. But you just, the member just said something. It's been a deep desire of mine that we need to look at finding ways to convert Wellington Street into pedestrian street to make sure to beautify it, making it green, so more people can enjoy the beauty of Parliament Hill as opposed to being able to drive their cars and perhaps even occupy, as we've seen.
Continuing debate, reprise de débat, the Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be splitting my time with the member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, Canadians have the right to protest. Protest has long been part of our democracy.
That's the one.
So important that we enshrined it in the Constitution. In the 4 freedoms enumerated in Section 2 of the Canadian Charter of Freedoms.
Nice shot.
All Canadians have the fundamental freedoms of conscience and religion.
Halfway point reached.
Of free speech and expression.
Good kill.
Protest in the public square, on a sidewalk, or in front of a legislature or in a public park is a fundamental freedom. And so if Canadians individually or in groups want to protest by walking up and down Wellington Street.
There are laws in Canada against hate speech and targeted harassment, as well as direct threats of physical violence.
Millions of Canadians over many decades have exercised this fundamental freedom.
And threats of assassination.
But what Canadians do not have the right to do is to blockade. There is no right to blockade. There is no right to blockade a street. There is no right to blockade a highway. There is no right to blockade an international border crossing. There is no right to blockade the construction of a new pipeline, nor is there a right to blockade. There is simply no right to blockade. And Canadians do not have the right to harm other people or to interfere with the freedoms of their fellow citizens. And while freedoms are fundamental, they are not limited. Freedoms are limited by the harm they do to other people, and freedoms are limited by how they interfere with other people's freedoms. Mr. Speaker, we are a nation rent asunder. West against east, rural against urban. We are a nation divided because of a lack of leadership. Leadership that begins at the top. Prime Minister on the language and rhetoric that he has used over the past 6 months.
That isn't even true. The secessionists are extremely far right and neo-Nazi, white nationalist, fascists.
Canadians in disparaging terms. Rhetoric that suggests those who agree with it are not Canadian. Rhetoric that support rhetorical and the fires of division. friends against friends, family members against family members, those unvaccinated against those vaccinated, those in favor of mandates against those opposed, those calling for an end to restrictions against those in favor of restrictions. And while many have fanned the flames of division in this country, they are not the head of government. They are not the Prime Minister of a G7 country. The Prime Minister's rhetoric in the last 6 months is unbefitting the high office that he holds. Instead of bridging divides and reducing tensions and lowering the temperature, he has demonized. Mr. Speaker, it is time for the protesters to end the blockade in Ottawa and the blockade at the border crossing in Western Canada. It is time for the protesters to go home to their families. We have heard their concerns. We have met with some of them, and it's now time. Their concerns have been heard loud and clear. No doubt in the coming weeks, their concerns will be debated here on the floor of this democratically elected legislature. Mr. Speaker, Canada is a trinity of belief in freedom, a belief in democracy, and a belief in the rule of law. And in a free and democratic society, the rule of law must be upheld.
The enemies have got 10 to win.
Governments in this country have delegated the enforcement of the law against blockades to the police. I urge protesters blockading in Ottawa and at our international border crossing to follow the direction of the police. In a democracy, only the state has to use force, including lethal force, to uphold these fundamental freedoms that we enjoy. We have delegated this use of force to law enforcement. In our democracy, citizens are not entitled to use force. As citizens, we settle our differences through the ballot box or through the court system. We don't settle them through force. Mr. Speaker, we all bear responsibility for the current divisions in this country. We all have a responsibility to reflect on how we got here. I grieve for my country. Instead of peace, order, and good government, we have chaos, disorder, and poor government. And while many democracies are under pressure, both from domestic and foreign forces, Canada has been particularly buffeted by an inability to respond. Laid bare the state of our institutions, and they are weak and ineffective. Most of the last year, we did not have a Governor General. 8 of the most senior members of the Canadian military were forced out in scandal. The former clerk of the Privy Council resigned in scandal. We have a military procurement system that cannot procure, and we have payroll systems that cannot pay. And we have a parliament that cannot do its job because the government defied 4 orders of this House and its committee for the production of documents. We have a debate that ran in these 2 elections, what is almost universally acclaimed as the 2 worst set of election debates since election debates were first held in this country in the 1968 election. The People's Republic of China interfered in the last federal election and spread disinformation through proxies, leading to the defeat of several candidates, and nothing has been done. We have some of the highest levels of household indebtedness in the world, and governments in this country are not far behind.
In fact, this very party, along with the Republicans in the United States, led by Donald Trump at the time, blamed the virus on the Chinese while still denying that its existence, its spread, its effect, or that it would ever affect North America.
Step in to bail them out. We have the 2nd worst healthcare system amongst leading economies of the OECD, according to the Commonwealth
What the fuck is he even talking about?
Greenhouse gases continue to rise each and every year that this government has been empowered to a record high level in 2019, the last